My name's Danielle Bryan. I'm the Executive Director of the Project on Government Oversight, or POGO, and welcome to the first Oversight Summit. I'm very excited to introduce Michael Horowitz, and we're going to have a little conversation. Let's make sure, yep.
It works?
Yep, there we go. So just in case you don't know, which is hard to believe if you're in the oversight community, Michael Horowitz is the head of SIGI, the Council of Inspectors General for Integrity and Efficiency, as well as the Inspector General of the Department of Justice. And so we have some things to talk about.
Here.
So the first thing...
All quiet in the oversight committee.
Yeah, nothing going on. So the first thing I wanted to talk to you about was the press has been focusing on predictions of increased oversight on the Hill. But since the IG Act passed 40 years ago, congressional capacity has significantly shrunk. In fact, we'll have some panels talking about that exact problem. So as a result, we're expecting to see an uptick of requests from Congress to inspectors general. So my first question is, what advice do you have for members and staff on contemplating whether to turn something over to an IG? What makes a good IG investigation?
That's a great question, and we do get lots of requests, lots of letters from chairs, ranking members of our oversight committees, and members throughout Congress. I think from our standpoint as IGs, it's somewhat good to be popular, but sometimes we're a little too popular in the sense that many of the letters seek to have us try to resolve what are in essence political fights or policy battles, and to try and have IGs weigh in as to who's right and who's wrong. And that's clearly not our role. We are not management, we're not policymakers, we're not there to settle, resolve, evaluate political fights. That doesn't mean that the reviews that we do don't touch on significant policy matters and significant political issues, small p. And that's fine. In fact, we often talk about what are the most significant policy issues that are being considered within the executive branch, on the Hill, in the public discussion as we consider the work we should be doing because of our limited resources. We do want to make sure our reports are impactful and helpful to policymakers. But when we do that kind of oversight, we're assessing how programs are or aren't working, as opposed to deciding whether they're the right programs or the wrong programs. And I think that's a lane we very much try and stay out of as IGs and stay in what is our role, which is assessing programs.
So that's how IGs can help the Congress. Are there ways, because we have a number of people here who are from the Congress, are there ways that Congress can be helping IGs?
Well, I think one of the most significant ways that Congress assists us is by having hearings on our reports, following up on our recommendations with the agencies that we oversee to see how they've done in terms of implementing our recommendations. It's the same that occurs in our view as is important with the public's interest in the work we do. We want to get word out as to what we do through our web pages, through the press, through other mediums. It's very important for us to have others also be aware of our work and be there to ask the hard questions of the agencies we oversee as to how they've done in terms of implementing our recommendations. Just having us do it is important. That is part of our role, part of our responsibility, something we do regularly. But having others do that as well, whether it's the public, whether it's the press, whether it's Congress, is very important. And sunlight on these issues matters, and follow-up matters, and it's very important that Congress do that.
And you're not shy about going to the Congress, but some IGs are maybe less comfortable sort of affirmatively going up there. So would you suggest sort of affirmatively from Congress reaching out to those IGs that are within their jurisdiction?
We have, under the IG Act, as you know, reporting responsibilities to our agencies and to Congress. It is part of our statutory mandate. It's not something I or others are making up in terms of going and speaking to Congress about our work. I think it's a very important part of an IG's responsibility to let our oversight committees know, whether it's HSGAC and HOGR in terms of their IG mandate generally, or our individual committees, like in my case, Judiciary, and our appropriators as well. Very important to remember about the appropriators that are overseeing your agencies. They were quite important in our fight that I was having with our agency and other IGs were having with their agency on access to records. Mm-hmm. They put provisions in appropriations laws that made it clear what their expectations were for the agencies to cooperate with IGs.
So you've been speaking largely now as the head of SIGI. I'm now
Right.
going to speak to you, switching hats, as the DOJ IG. And you have been in an unusual position of having both the head of your agency, the Attorney General, and the President himself referring things to you. Do you take all the cases because you are an executive branch agency, even though you report to the Congress? And how do you figure out whether you will or will not sort of follow those orders?
Right. So we have had that. We had that actually previously when Attorney General Holder referred the Fast and Furious matter to our office, which for those who follow us know we did as well. And it isn't something that regularly happens, but it is something that I think is very important for all IGs to have that kind of relationship and dialogue with their leadership. For the same reasons, it's important to have that dialogue with the Congress and the oversight committees. You want to know what's important to your agency leadership. It is helpful to have, whether it's the Attorney General or the Deputy Attorney General or the component heads, letting you know where, if you did a review of one of their programs or one of their issues, that it would be helpful to them. That's information that we want to take in, much like when we get requests from Congress, in assessing what kind of work we're going to do. And what has been, I think, beneficial, certainly in my agency, we've had a very strong relationship with the Attorneys General and Deputies Attorney General throughout the 30-year history in our case. We came into being in 1988, and a very respectful relationship. Neither Attorney General Holder nor Attorney General Sessions told us or instructed us what to do. They made the request that we look at that work. And that's something we assess, and obviously, much like requests that come in from Congress, a request from leadership of an agency that says, this would be helpful to have you look at this program and give us your thoughts on whether we're doing it right or wrong, is important. Now, again, we keep in mind, I'm not looking to get involved in a political or policy fight just because the Attorney General asked me to do something as opposed to the chair of the Judiciary Committee. But having said that, our last review, the election review, we very much focused on what were the issues regarding the department's handling of its policies, procedures, practices, and where could we as the IG office make recommendations that would help the department in future situations it might find itself where these kinds of issues arose. That was very much what we were looking to do, was think about the broader systemic issues.
So that was really a hot button report and issue.
Sort of.
To remind people, this was the look into the FBI and DOJ's actions just leading up to the 2016 election. And as you may remember, there was almost sort of a hysteria that was growing around the leading up to the release of your report on both sides of the aisle. And it seemed to me that because you are such a straight shooter and people sort of recognize that you were going to take things by the facts, that as soon as you released your report, sort of the hysteria died down. It seemed like, people understood the facts and things calmed down. What advice do you give to other IGs that are likely to be facing in the next few years as big a sort of high profile issue as this? How did you navigate that high pressure and manage to survive with such great success?
I think one of the things we try and do, since so many issues at the Justice Department are higher profile perhaps than others, obviously not as high profile as that, but Fast and Furious, there was obviously a fair amount of attention, but many other reviews that we've done certainly get a fair amount of scrutiny by those who follow the Justice Department. And one of the things we talked about with that team that did the work, as well as the Fast and Furious team, but all of the teams in our office that do our reviews, is you can't have different rules for different reviews. You have to go forward consistent with, if it's an audit, Yellow Book standards, if it's an investigation, the SIGI's standards for investigations, your own policies and procedures. And very much focus on what the facts are. What does the evidence show? In that instance, we looked through 1 million plus records, did over 100 interviews of individuals, some on multiple occasions, and there's no substitute for making sure you know the facts in is at least as great a detail as the next person who's looking at this issue. Because the last thing we can afford to do is an IG office put out a report and then have people say, well, you missed this issue, you missed that issue. And so when people said, how come you're not moving faster? How come you can't get this report done in that case, it was about 16 months, 17 months or so from when we launched in January of 2017. One of the things I like to point out is we found some of the most significant evidence in that case, including some of the text messages, but also the classified information that's in the classified appendix in the second year mark, in the 13th, 14th, 15th month of the review. And only because we kept pushing to follow up on information we were getting along the way. These investigations, these reviews, audits are iterative. You start out looking at a certain area, but obviously as IGs, we're going to follow the leads and follow the information where they go. So it's hard to predict exactly how long a review is going to take, but you have to balance completeness and thoroughness with, of course, endless looking. And that's one of the challenges, frankly, as an IG and as the team, is when you've done that.
And I appreciate you pointed out that it was a classified appendix. As a consumer of your products without a clearance, I very much appreciate that that's sort of how you approach some of your classified work. Could you speak to whether that is something that, broadly, not all IGs are doing that. And in fact, a lot of classified reports, we don't even know the names of them or that they exist because they're classified.
Well, I'll speak to what we do. We very much want to make sure that not just Congress, because Congress does get all of our work product, including classified work, but that the public knows that the IG's office has done a review of a program, even if it's classified. So, for example, about a year or so into my tenure, so somewhere in I can't remember, it was 2013, 2014, we did a review of the FBI's handling of its authorities under FISA Section 702 and its authorities. Well, ultimately, the department determined that it was entirely classified. So Congress saw the report. The public did not get a report, even what we would normally do, which is an unclassified summary of the classified report. That's our normal practice. In that instance, that was not even possible. But we did nevertheless put out a statement that announced we had completed the review and we had sent it to Congress because Congress could get it. And sometimes what we do, and this occurred in the Boston Marathon bombing report, for example, we put out a classified report and a public summary, a lengthy public summary, but even some of those portions of the public summary had been labeled as either law enforcement sensitive, I believe it was, by the department. We disagreed with it. And what we did was we put out a report, and in the public report, you'll see a statement in there about our objections. And going back to your earlier comment about or question about Congress and its role, Congress is then in a position, because they have both reports. They can see the classified version, they can see the unclassified version, and they can make their own assessment of what they think of that situation as well.
So we've talked about some of the high-profile stuff you've done in the past. Right now, DOJ is again in the news about the succession of the Attorney General, and I've been hearing some are asking whether this is something that could be reviewed by the Inspector General, whether someone can be appointed, Whitaker in this case, to be AG rather than the succession. Is that an appropriate question for an IG to review?
I'll ask another IG that question if I can. No.
I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't ask you a hard question.
I think I'll step back from the specific question, just generally speaking, go back to what I mentioned earlier. We're there as IGs not to resolve, as well, I think, fair to say, legal issues as general matter, with one exception, and I'll turn again to our access fight. There, the question was, what did the IG Act mean? As many of you know, in 2008, Congress amended the IG Act to provide that IG should have their own general counsels. And so in that instance, we were very much in a legal disagreement over the meaning of the word all in the IG Act.
Which is ridiculous.
As I say that, for those who followed it, the Office of Legal Counsel issued a 61 or 62-page opinion on that issue. And as a lawyer, I felt I could say this: only a lawyer could write 62 pages about what the meaning of the word all is.
And be wrong.
I didn't say that.
I
you
did.
said that right. We certainly disagreed with that, and fortunately, ultimately prevailed in going to Congress and having them reaffirm our right to access to all records. But there are two things I'll mention with regard to statutory interpretations. I think as a general matter, that probably is not something that would fall within an IG's role to assess the law, the statute, what a statute means. Congress passed the statute. Congress is uniquely positioned.
Or the Constitution in this case.
Or the constitutional issue. Obviously, the courts are there to resolve a constitutional issue. The other thing that's unique about my office, and obviously this we could talk about all day, which is we don't have authority over decisions by lawyers acting as lawyers. There's the Office of Professional Responsibility. By statute, my office lacks jurisdiction over that. We've objected, as you know, to that for 30 years. But if we're being asked to assess a decision by lawyers in the department on what is purely a legal matter, that really, by law, would go to the Office of Professional Responsibility.
And that's a whole other reform that we're going to have to work on in the new Congress.
We've tried.
Yes, no, we'll keep trying, I guess, on that one. So we did also recently witness IGs being in the news, where there was a HUD political person who was briefly going to take over and become the new acting IG over at Interior. And we at POGO and many of our colleagues have been concerned about extensive vacancies of IGs. In this case, Mary Kendall's been, there's been a vacancy in that office for over 9 years. And Mary has been, was the acting, but as you know from the Vacancies Act restrictions, she, after 210 days, which is a long time ago, she's no longer even allowed to be acting. So one of the things, and I know you can't speak to the specifics of that case, and the good news is that the administration, I think, was embarrassed into stopping that activity, but it raised this question. We're worried about acting IGs, but when someone's not even an acting anymore, how protected are they? Or are they just a regular civil service SES who can be moved around in an agency, or what's going on there?
So from SIGI's standpoint, and I'll put on my SIGI hat again, we certainly take the view that acting IGs or principal deputies who are serving in the capacity as leading the organization because the 210 days has run should have all the protections that an IG has and not be removed without the 30 days notice to Congress provided for in the Act, and should have all the abilities to hire personnel themselves, consistent again with the IG Act, make decisions regarding what audits, reviews, investigations to conduct. But obviously it's not a settled question, a legal question. It's an open legal question. Fortunately, over the years, we have, in working with the administrations, past and current, there's been a respect for that ability to allow the acting or principal deputy who is serving as acting to continue in that function. And it's an issue again that Congress is there to conduct oversight and to conduct hearings on. And if there was ever an issue like that, I think the ball would then be in their court to sort through that. We have tremendously talented acting IGs and deputies throughout the IG community, and we're fortunate that that's the case because we have now, I think 14, 15, I lost track of actually the numbers because we have some recent retirements upcoming, vacancies among the 73 IGs. So we're more and more needing that kind of talent at the deputy level who can fill in, and we have it. They've done great work, but it is a very substantial challenge, and I know that because when I showed up in April of 2012 as the IG at Justice, my deputy, Cynthia Schneider, had been serving as acting IG for 15 months, or as deputy, depending upon the time period, and faced a number of challenges because that was right when the Fast and Furious issues started arising. And there's an immediate question about your authority and your authority being tested. It also happened to be, by the way, the same time the access issues started arising. And the reason that we go through appointment process, whether we're presidentially appointed or agency appointed, is to have that kind of position where an authority where when we go to our agency heads or to Congress or speak publicly, we're speaking as the head of the agency. There's no doubt about that. There's little doubt about that. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges that any acting IG faces, because they don't know exactly how long that tenure is going to be. They don't have, it's the same with their agency heads. They don't know how long that person's going to be acting. The Congress oversight committees don't know how long that person's going to be acting. It's a challenging and in many respects far more challenging position than IGs themselves have to deal with. But again, fortunately, we have some tremendously talented people serving those positions.
So your office, according to reports, currently have some open investigations into leaks to the media. Do you believe there's a public interest balancing test regarding the protection of the free press and the public's right to know? And how do you navigate that?
Yeah. I think in most everything IGs do, there's always a balancing test that you need to keep in mind. The world, our world is not a black and white world. There's a lot of gray out there. And so, yes, in the media area and the leak area, that's a challenge we face all the time. And as you might guess, we get a number of referrals to us to investigate leaks at the Justice Department. We get requests from defense lawyers whose clients have been harmed or impacted by a media leak. We get requests from people within the department, components who have classified information or sensitive grand jury information or other kinds of information they believe unlawfully disclosed. And we get requests from Congress as well. And one of the things that we need to consider in those instances are some of the issues that you've raised, along with broader questions about the information, how likely it is that someone did in fact engage in an unauthorized leak. Turns out, as if you've looked at, for example, our recent summary regarding the Manchester bombing matter that we were asked to look at, turns out there were thousands of people who got that information. And so we pretty quickly knew that we were never going to figure out who might have disclosed that information inappropriately, or even whether it was an inappropriate disclosure, because someone might have gotten it who may not have had a restriction on what they could do with the information. So it is something we look at. We're respectful of the public's right to know and the media's right to publish information. But we also understand that individuals within, and I'll speak now in the Justice Department, individuals in the Justice Department who have sensitive national security information, information about criminal cases, other protected information, who disclose that inappropriately can be harming not only national security, obviously critically important, ongoing criminal investigations, but also individuals. People under investigation have a right to, if they did something wrong, to be charged criminally with it, or if it's a civil matter, have a civil complaint filed against them, but not to have it be leaked because somebody perhaps doesn't like the fact that a prosecutor isn't bringing a criminal case or isn't bringing a matter. People's reputations are on the line oftentimes in what the Justice Department's doing, as is national security. And those are important issues, and we think about all of those issues as we decide what to do and which ones to look at. And as we pointed out, I'll go back to the election review we released in June of this year. You saw in there individuals telling us that some of the decision making that was done at the FBI was done for some people, not everybody, some people, based on concerns that others might leak the information if the decision didn't go the way they wanted. That is not the way we would want public policy being made, or certainly not criminal investigations to be handled. And I think that's a concern.
So we're bumping up on an issue that's very important to me, which is whistleblowers.
And to me.
Yes, and to you. So
And to all IGs.
often or frequently, leak investigations, insider threat investigations turn out to be retaliatory investigations. And how do you make sure that that's not what you're doing? Because certainly historically, there have been IGs where that's in fact what has happened.
It's a great question. It's a very important question. It's something we keep in mind all the time as we think about our work and consider what is an improper disclosure and what might be legal, lawful whistleblowing, and making sure that as agencies and as we look at insider threat issues, we're not chilling whistleblowers who appropriately want to blow the whistle on wrongdoing. And one of the things that I think is important for whistleblowers and their interest in coming forward is making sure, and this again is an IG responsibility, to help educate whistleblowers on the appropriate way to blow the whistle, particularly where it's classified information, because there's now a whole process set up through legislation on how to blow the whistle in a classified, with classified information. We are out there trying to educate whistleblowers on that. The law doesn't allow you to call yourself a whistleblower and go out on a street corner and disclose classified information. Even if you have the best of intentions in terms of thinking there really is wrongdoing going on. The law does provide a mechanism to report that always to an IG, and now a mechanism to go to Congress if you follow the process laid out in the statute. And that's very important for us, as I said, to get that word out to the whistleblowing community. I speak at events involving whistleblowers. Rob Storch is going to be here this afternoon. He's now the NSA IG. He speaks regularly on that. He was my deputy and whistleblower ombuds when he was in my shop. And we're trying to get that word out. We also make sure when we get leak referrals from our agencies and our components, and this has happened on more than one occasion, where the disclosure may have been unauthorized due to internal policy or guidance, but is not a violation of law. Mm-hmm. We actually have had occasion to write back to the leadership of the component, citing the McLean decision in part, which is a Supreme Court case from 2015, I think it was, or so, that makes clear that if information isn't protected by law, it is protected whistleblowing to go to the press in that case. And we have had occasion to write back to component heads and said, this is not, in our view, a violation of law or department regulations and statutory violation. And we've looked at the whistleblower laws, and it appears to us to be protected whistleblowing activities. So we're not handling it, and we would strongly advise you not to conduct investigation, because if you do, we will end up investigating the retaliation matter. And so we've taken it upon ourselves to do that as well.
That's great. And people should start thinking about questions, because we're going to have two people running around with mics in a second. But there was an op-ed that the Special Inspector General for Afghanistan and Reconstruction, John Sopko, wrote a couple of months ago in The Hill. And he was challenging the IG community to think not just about inputs and outputs, but also outcomes, and and sort of challenging whether the community of IGs are incentivized to focus on the most important issues. And the other thing he raised was, should there be more cross-cutting subject matter IGs that are looking at issues across the entire government, like cybersecurity or healthcare? So what do you think about some of those ideas? Are IGs actually incentivized to be doing the most important things?
Yep. So I think those are both great issues and important issues for us in the community to think about. We talk about it all the time when we're doing our work. It's fine to think about the minutia and the important individual issues that we're finding in our audits, our reviews, our investigations. But I'm oftentimes speaking with our folks about stepping back. What's the bigger issue? What's the bigger picture here that we're seeing that may need systemic reform or systemic changes? Because that's, I think, what we bring to the table is not just finding misconduct when it occurs, not just finding problems in programs, but really our core function and our core mission by statute is to help the department become a more effective and efficient operator of programs. And to do that, you really have to understand the bigger picture and think more systemically and more broadly and make recommendations that are geared that way. We had a 40th anniversary event in July at the Capitol Visitor Center and heard from several different speakers from Congress, from executive branch, making that same point, which is more and more the expectation and the desire on the part of policymakers from IGs is to look at those bigger systemic issues and think more broadly. Are programs effective? What are the outcomes showing? Yes, we need to look at inputs. Yes, we need to look at particular specific processes, but step back and think more broadly and try and write our reports to the bigger picture question of the work. And I think one of the challenges we have as IGs in doing that, obviously, is there's always this question of, well, what's your return on investment, and measuring our return on investment based on what our dollar findings are. Well, as an agency, the Department of Justice, where I'm often looking at justice issues, my ROI is not that good compared to other executive branch agencies, because there was zero value in the election review that we did if you do just purely dollars and cents. Fast and Furious, national security reviews that we do of FBI's practices, BOP, all the reviews we've done of the Federal Bureau of Prisons and their handling of female inmates, mental health issues, aging inmates. None of those had dollar findings with them. And so I think what we need to be thinking about as a community, and the oversight community needs to be thinking about, is how do you measure success for IGs beyond the one metric, which is an important one for many organizations, which is dollar-related findings. And Congress should be thinking about that as well. On the second question about cross-cutting IGs, I think that what needs to happen, and hopefully people who are watching SIGI think we're doing more of this, is that's really what SIGI was created to do in 2008. One of our missions, if you look at the Section 11 of the IG Act, which is the provision that relates to the creation of the Council of the Inspectors General on Integrity and Efficiency, is training, but the other important mission statement there is looking at issues that cross-cut our own individual agencies to broader questions like cyber-related issues. And that's something we are doing more of. Earlier this year, we issued our first ever Top Management Challenges report, taking all 60-plus IGs that issued such reports, consolidating them, and writing a report about the 7 biggest issues we saw across the IG community. We are talking about and doing more cyber-related work. We did a review about devices and mobile devices and how agencies did address those issues. And so I think there is a mechanism in place. I think we as a community need to do more of that kind of work.
And speaking, when you were raising the question about ROIs, that's something that we at POGO actually, as you know, we issued a report this year where we were raising questions about the congressionally mandated reporting requirements for semi-annual reports and how there are 22 of them, and we think many of them are sort of less meaningful, and the way ROIs often is captured, which is sort of varies from IG to IG also, is money that could be saved. It's not even necessarily is saved. So I'm glad you're raising that issue, and that is something that Congress needs to. We're looking forward to working with the Congress on fixing some of that, so IGs can focus on the more important issues.
And I'll just, before we ask questions, before I forget, give a mention to oversight.gov, which I think is something hopefully everybody here is following and looking at and knows about, but I think is one of the most significant advances in the community and will help foster that kind of cross-cutting work, because one of the things that it allows me to do as an IG is see what 73 IGs are doing. I don't have to go to each web page to find out what they're doing. I now see every day and get ideas from what other IGs are doing and thinking about, and my teams are having that benefit from the web page as well. So that's something that's very helpful to us. Hopefully, and I think it has been given the feedback, helpful to policymakers, whether it's in the executive branch or in Congress, and to the oversight community to see what we're doing. And we take ideas from all comers. It doesn't have to be the chair of a committee or the ranking member or a member of Congress or the Attorney General asking us to do something. We get requests from the public. We get requests, as you know, from POGO and other oversight organizations. We want to get that kind of input and hear from folks.
That's great. Okay. Yes. Let's. Rebecca is going to come to you with a mic.
Hi, I'm Kevin Malshine, former IG at the Architect of the Capitol. My question, I'm looking at the title of the discussion, which is From Watergate to Today. The hallmark violation in Watergate was, or one of them, was the presidential misuse and abuse of federal agencies. Are IGs today equipped to deal with that kind of, either direction from the White House to the Attorney General that you've got to look into certain area, or a direction to the IRS, or a direction to other agencies? Can an IG, is an IG situated to look into that and perhaps challenge it?
So we have, particularly after the IG Empowerment Act, the tool of looking at all the records in our agency. To be clear, and this came up in Fast and Furious, where the White House, the Obama White House, did not allow us to look at White House records. We're not the IG over the Executive Office of the President. There's no IG for the Executive Office of the President, much like there's no IG for Congress and no IG for the Judiciary. So we can look at the records in our agency and follow up. And there have been several reviews that have gone on in the last several years of actions by agency leadership that have raised concerns. The HHS OIG did a review of their secretary, who resigned shortly after. The EPA IG did reviews of their agency's leadership and actions, and others have done the same. I think we are equipped to do the work reviewing our mandate under the statute. And I think, going back to the question of congressional requests or other requests, I think it's very important for people to understand what are we authorized to do under the IG Act and what are we not authorized to do. In my case, for example, the carve out for actions by lawyers. And as individuals, as IGs, and the 14,000 or so staff within the 73 IGs, the foundation for what we do is the IG Act. We're going to look at that, understand what we're authorized to do and what we're not authorized to do, and stay within those bounds. That's what we stand for, the rule of law. We stand for those issues, and we're certainly not going to stray from what the IG Act tells us we can or can't do. And frankly, as you certainly know, and others in the community, in the oversight community who follow IGs know, those IGs who've gotten themselves in trouble either have failed to be independent as required by the IG Act, or frankly gone rogue in some respect and become untethered from their responsibilities under the IG Act. We're not free actors to just go around and do whatever we think. We have a statute, and we have something that grounds us.
So it also sounds a little bit like your question, maybe the answer may be no. Yes, Kathleen. Wait 1 sec for the...
Thank you. My name's Kathleen Clark. I'm wondering if you could speculate about what it would take for us to get an Inspector General for the Executive Office of the Presidency. And also, in that imaginary world, what an IG's jurisdiction could be in that setting, just as the Justice Department IG has circumscribed jurisdiction. You don't have authority over lawyers' conduct. Can you spell out, again, in this speculative world, a useful IG with some limited jurisdiction in the White House?
I think I'm not going to go there and speculate because, again, I point out that there isn't an IG for any of the three branches of government at the highest levels of those organizations. There is one, but not with the same authorities. The statement was there is one in the House, but not under the IG Act. I'm talking about a statutorily independent Inspector General. None of them come with those authorities in any of the three branches at the highest levels, and obviously any of the legislation, whether it was for a congressional IG, a judicial IG, or an executive branch IG, would have to go through two houses of Congress, be signed by the president, and I'll leave it to others who are more attuned politically to decide what the success potential is of any of that.
Sharon, over in the corner.
Hi, Sharon Bradford Franklin with New America's Open Technology Institute. I was very interested in your comments toward the end of your remarks about the ability to look at return on investment, but you're looking at justice, so it's different than a typical, waste, fraud, and abuse monetary assessment. But I wonder to what extent you think there's more of a role for your office and then also the IGs that cover the intelligence agencies to look at the efficacy of surveillance programs. So this came up a lot with the Section 215 telephone records program. There were a lot of findings. It was ineffective, and the intelligence agencies have made the valid point that it's hard to say that any one case derives from one program or one source of intelligence. But it is important to measure efficacy. Do you think that the IGs can play more of a role there?
Great question. It is something we are doing certainly regularly in my office. Is when we're doing reviews, we're asking questions of managers and leaders of the components. What are your measurements for success? What are you, beyond, back to the earlier question, just outputs? We did, and at the Justice Department, traditionally, the answer was always, well, we indicted 1,000 people, or we prosecuted and convicted this number of people. That's useful to know. It's an important figure to understand, but it's not the be-all and end-all of the discussion. And what we've found and we've reported on regularly is that there really aren't many measures beyond output measures of the programs we've looked at. But it is a question we are asking, and in our reports, national security reports, many of which don't see the full light of day, but they do go to Congress, we seek to include that kind of information. And I think our 702 and our 215 reports that we've done on the FBI's use of those authorities, national security letter authorities, what was the exigent letter report 12, 13, 14 years ago, has had an impact and has been an important measure and has been, I think, from our interactions with Congress, very useful as they thought about how to revise those programs. So I think IGs are well equipped to ask the questions. We're obviously not the ones who are going to put in place the metrics That's for management to figure out how they're measuring success and what those measures are. But we are there to assess them and to, I think, quite at the core of our responsibilities, report out on whether those are the effective measurements.
Alex Howard over here.
Good morning. Alex Howard, independent for the moment. Two questions. The first is thank you for oversight.gov, but I don't think all IGs are participating in it quite yet. And as you know, many reports still are being sought by advocates under the FOIA. Have you seen more IGs post their reports and start being involved in that? If not, when and where is that going to change? You say you post data on it as well, but when you look at it, the reports themselves are PDFs, and there's a bunch of fields. Do you think you'll be complying with the 2013 executive order to make the underlying data for the site available? And then the second, to what extent are you empowered to evaluate whether agency officials are acting ethically in a proactive basis? For instance, if they limited funding to an ongoing investigation, or they didn't properly recuse themselves where they have a conflict of interest?
So on the first question about oversight.gov, glad you asked that, because when we launched it, we had 67 of the 73 IGs participating. The only ones that weren't participating were several in the intelligence community, which didn't post any public reports, and then a couple of the legislative branch IGs, which aren't covered in the same way under the IG Act, and weren't participating. In the 1 year now since we launched, 3 of the intelligence community IGs have for the first time issued semi-annual reports that are public, and they were posted to oversight.gov. So we had the National Security Agency, the Defense Intelligence Agency, and the National Reconnaissance Agency all start posting reports publicly. As a result, I think in part due to oversight.gov. So we now have 70 of 73 IGs on board. So every IG that posts a public report is now posting them to oversight.gov. And we're all thinking about ways to be more transparent and how can we make more information available to the public. On your second question about the underlying data, that is something we've talked about, and we've not only gotten the request from folks outside the IG community, but also people inside who are working on data analytics about how can we make some of that information more broadly available for use by those outside and inside the community. And that's one of the enhancements that we'd like to be able to do. One of the things that we are hoping for that was in the Senate appropriations bill that is for one of the handful of bills that has not yet been passed. There's money in that bill, $2 million, to fund several enhancements to oversight.gov that would allow us to move forward on open recommendations and some of these other issues that we'd very much like to go forward on. And just to be clear, for those of you who don't know, we basically built oversight.gov on the volunteer efforts of many IGs who came together because SIGI is not appropriated. We used a platform that had been built previously by the Postal OIG, and with their help on the technology side and other IGs on the sort of working group side, we were able to move forward with it. It's a pretty, from a tech standpoint, it's a pretty basic web page. For the IG community, it was a huge step forward, but it's still a pretty basic platform, which we recognize and would love to be able to do some of the things that you've mentioned and some others as well. In terms of the final question, we have the tools and the authorities under the IG Act, and when requests come in that are within our bailiwick, and we've assessed them as the kinds of reviews we should be doing because they relate to important issues that IGs are well equipped to handle and do. I think we will consider them in the sort of bucket of information and requests we get. But In terms of legal authority, I don't think we have, with the IG Empowerment Act being passed, challenges with legal authority. Several IGs are dealing with some budget issues and other kinds of issues. We would like to see testimonial subpoena authority get through. That did not happen the last go round. That is something that's important. But I think otherwise we're well equipped under the IG Act to move forward.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Hi. Jory Heckman with Federal News Network. Not to put too fine a point on what the DOJ IG does and does not plan to look into in the future, I do know that House and Senate Democrats over the last month or so have sent a number of letters requesting that your office looks into the future of the FBI headquarters, looking at plans to keep it in D.C. as opposed to a suburban Maryland or Virginia plan. In terms of just the dollars and cents of which plan makes the most sense, is that something that falls into the purview of your office, or does it go back to the political battle score settling that you had mentioned kind of at the top?
Well, I'll save my answer and responses to the congressional letters for Congress and speak with them about their requests. But generally speaking, again, the issues that relate to construction issues and issues related to contracting, we look at, for example, with the Federal Bureau of Prisons. Those issues come up there. So partly it'll depend on, as with most or with many requests we get, they are complex and they raise multiple issues, and sometimes we sort through them. The election review was a good example. We got a lot of different requests in looking to do a lot of different things, and we laid out what we were going to do, and we also explained what we weren't going to do. And we would do the same, I think, in any kind of request like that. But certainly, questions that come up about how the Justice Department is spending their money or potentially spending money and how they handled certain issues would be, construction-related issues, for example, we deal with at the BOP.
Okay, last question is gentleman in the back. Oh, I'm sorry. I couldn't see you. You were behind Liz.
Yeah, hi, I'm Ann Laurent. So we're expecting an avalanche of oversight from Congress in January, beginning in January. How would you advise staff and members to most effectively use all of the means available to them to accomplish that goal with speed? Because obviously, having 10,000 investigations dragging on forever is not a good thing for anybody. That is to say, how do you all work together with GAO, congressional staff with their hearing and litigation ability, the IG community, and God knows there's probably others that I'm not naming. I mean, how is an office, for example, effectively looking out at that and saying, okay, here's how I'm going to deploy against the issues that are the most important, knowing that the IG guys are going to have their pick of whether they take it or not. GAO I can order around, but they have a lot of stuff to do, and my own staff is 5 people and have 4,000 things, and 4 of them aren't even lawyers.
Great question. So one of the things we make sure we do is we have quarterly meetings with GAO that do the work oversight, the teams that oversee justice, Department of Justice, to make sure we're coordinated and not duplicating effort. And obviously many of the issues we're asked to do, they're asked to do, and we have a very strong working relationship. And on a broader scale, at the SIGI level, we meet regularly. Allison Lerner, Vice Chair of SIGI, who's the National Science Foundation IG, and myself meet regularly with Gene Dodaro and the leadership at GAO to talk about the broader issues that cross-cut the IG community. And again, make sure we're coordinated and not stepping on each other's work and not duplicating, most importantly, each other's work. In terms of congressional oversight and asks, I guess I'd finish where I started, which is I think one of the things that can frustrate Congress when they're dealing certainly with IGs, and I think to some extent perhaps GAO, is we're not going to turn around an answer in a month. We're not going to give the answer in 2 months even. It's going to take months for us to get the records, go through them, interview people. We're going to issue a thorough report. we can't be seen as just responding to a political concern. We want to think about, as we talked about earlier, some of the bigger picture issues that we're looking at as well, particularly if we see them as we're starting and going into that review. So that can be a frustration for oversight committees that we're not a, turn it around immediately approach. It can be a frustration for our agency's leaderships and components leaderships that we're not in that mode of just turning things around quickly. So I think for staff, I would say it's important to think about what kind of product do we deliver and what kind of product would be useful for us to handle as whether it's solely or as a follow-up to a congressional hearing. I think one of the things that I've seen frequently, not all the time, but frequently, I've now testified 6.5 years, probably approaching 40 times at hearings, is in many instances, again, not all, little follow-up. We have a good hearing based on our findings, other people at the panels who are policymakers, members talking policy, good give and take, bipartisan agreement, discussion about the important issues. But oftentimes, I always wonder what happened next. And many occasions, they're on to everybody's on to the next issue, whether it's members of Congress or the agency leadership, and that's something I hope that folks step back and think about. Not just let's have a hearing and call it a day, but what did we learn at the hearing? Because what I've also learned in this job is at every single hearing, the question I get from both sides, doesn't really matter who's which administration it was that was in power, who's in charge, it's how do we fix the problem? What can we do legislatively to fix the problem? They're always talking that and thinking that. The question is there that follow through?
Well, please join me in thanking Michael for kicking off the day.